Hi, this is a book called The Confessions of a Taxi Driver, and this is the introduction to that book. And so we'll start. I started driving taxis over 30 years ago. I had at least 3 years driving taxis, and I had a lot of fares, what you'd call them, during that time. There's some stories that stood out in my life. There's some stories that stood out in the taxi. And in this short book, I'll include some of those stories. At the time when I was driving taxis, I was far away from God. I wasn't going to a church, and I was involved in sleeping with a prostitute every Friday night with my taxi fares. I used to start the beginning of my shift, and around about 8 o'clock, I'd have $120 or $200 in earnings, and I used to go and spend most of that earning on a prostitute. And I lost my license years later, and I tend to think that I lost my license because God wanted to bring me out of that addiction and wanted to bring me out of that lifestyle. When I lost my license, that wasn't the main case. I got charged with an offence that made me a sex offender. And I didn't do that crime, but I got charged with a sex-based offence, and that sex-based offence on my record didn't allow me to get a taxi license again. So I couldn't drive taxis again, and that broke my heart because taxi driving was my favourite job. If you know me from my books, you'll know that I like to meet new people. I like to meet strangers and have conversations with strangers. And taxi driving is something that you can meet strangers and have conversations with strangers. So it was really good, really enjoyable. So there's going to be some R-rated material in this book. I'll keep a lot of the descriptions as PG as I can, but I would recommend that you don't give this book to your children to read. There's many things that can happen in a taxi, and having drunk females in your taxi, you can imagine all sorts of things get offered. I remember a prostitute getting in my taxi one time and offering to perform oral sex on me if I gave her a lift into the city. And I told her that I'm going into the city anyway, so you don't have to bother. But these are the sort of things that can happen to a taxi driver. There's a lot of stories, and I'm sure there's been TV shows with encounters of taxi drivers, and they've been entertaining. If you've watched the movies, you've watched the life of taxi drivers. People are always catching taxis in New York City, it seems. And if you're watching on video, I've got a screenshot of a New York taxi. I drove taxis for at least 3 years and did quite a number of shifts, both day shifts and night shifts. and I had a tremendous amount of passengers in those days. Most day shifts, I'd have 20 customers in a day shift. So not all this material is going to be PG, but I thought I'd mention my taxi driving and make a book out of it. I want you to know that I've always been honest with the books that I've written, and I've endeavoured to be forthcoming, and I don't put gloves on when I box. I have got the gloves off, and so I'm brutally honest with the things I've said, and part of my taxi driving experience included meeting a certain prostitute and falling in love with her. And part of my taxi driving experience included me frequenting a strip club where taxi drivers got free admission and free drinks. And so that's included in my confessions of a taxi driver. And they'll be clearly marked. So you can skip those chapters, but you'll find that they add to the story. I am a Christian who's got a good walk with Christ now. I've struggled all my life with addictions, but I've got a very close relationship with Jesus right now. And so I was preparing the chapter titles, and my brother commented, would I want to include my seeing a prostitute, and would I want to include me frequenting a strip joint? And I said, I've always been honest with my readers, and I've never held anything back. And so I'm not going to depart from that now, trying to make a clean and glossy book without any R-rated material in it. And so I commend you to watch these videos, and as it becomes a book, I commend you to the chapters of the book. So chapter 1, Domino's pizza delivery driver. That's chapter 1. So before I drove a taxi, I had a job as a Domino's pizza delivery driver, and I moved to a new city. I moved from Sydney, Australia to Brisbane, Australia when I got married. I was a newly married, and I didn't have many qualifications. And so I applied for a pizza delivery driver job, and I got the job. You pretty much only need to have a car and a license to be able to get that job. And I got that job and eventually became a trainee manager in Domino's Pizza. But while I was a pizza delivery driver, we had a radius from the store of about 3 miles. If you did a circle around the store and went about 3 miles in each direction, or even 5 miles in each direction, that was our delivery area. And I didn't know that God was planning it at the time. I delivered pizzas and earn that income. And my wife had a job, and I didn't know that God was preparing me for taxi driving, but I really got to know my local area really well, knowing all the streets within a 3-mile radius. Of course, we had regular customers that were in a regular street and at a regular address, but we had new people ringing up every day, and would have to find a new street on the map and go and find that address. This is when we had street directories, and they were in a book. And so we had a big map up on the wall at Domino's Pizza, and we could look up the name of the street on the map and find it on the wall. And if we could work out where it is on the wall, we wouldn't need our street directory in the car to actually find the place. But I found that learning all the streets in about 5 suburbs was very handy when I went into taxi driving, because when I went into taxi driving, I started taking passages in those areas that I knew and I'd learned in my pizza delivery driving time. Of course, with pizza delivery driving, you don't have a passenger in the taxi, but you are meeting people. You're knocking on people's doors, and they're opening doors, and you're exchanging money and giving them their pizza. I remember I had one R-rated pizza delivery. I went to a hotel, high-rise hotel, and the door was opened, and the guy said, go and put the delivery on the table. And his girlfriend or his wife was on the bed, totally naked. And the guy asked his wife, where's the money? And she got up and went to the table and got a purse, and she's totally naked. And I thought that was a bit of a shock to me, that a guy would invite someone into his room when his wife is naked or his girlfriend is naked. But that was something that was seared into my memory. But there was some different things that happened in the delivery of pizzas. We'd see people in different positions. It was always busiest when the football was on. There'd be a rush of pizza deliveries before the game, and while the game played, it would slow down, but then at halftime, the pizza deliveries would start up again. But I'm really glad that I had the time delivering pizzas, learning the 5 suburbs or 5 or 10 suburbs worth of streets, and understanding those suburbs, because when it came to getting my taxi license and starting to drive taxis, I was able to always spend time in those areas and be fast to pick up customers in the areas because I knew the streets. So chapter 2, getting my license. So when you're not qualified to do many things, there isn't many jobs for you to do and for you to have. And one of the jobs that I noticed always in the paper was taxi driver, taxi driver, taxi driver. And I finally found out that a taxi driving company, Yellow Cabs, and in Brisbane, and I found out that they put on a training course for you to get your license. And I went to one of these training courses that they train you to drive a taxi, and they trained us in a training course how to use the taxi and how to apply for the license. And then they actually had the 5 tests that you could possibly be given, a multiple choice test at the licensing department. And they gave us the 5 tests and the 5 sets of answers, and they said, study that. And if you see the question, you know the answer if you studied correctly. So we went into the tests with knowledge of what the answers were. But the test was pretty comprehensive, and you really needed to study to test it. Apparently in London, I've heard that you've got to know every street in the city of London or something. They've got like an impossible test, but we had an easier test. I got my license through the Yellow Cab base, the Yellow Cab taxi base, and they had like 100 taxis in that base in this big lot where you could drive taxis. And that was the first taxi job that I had, driving taxis out of that base. They taught you how the radio works, how to accept a job, how to go on a job, what sort of protocol to have with customers, how to treat customers, how to secure a job, how to end a job, what to do with a job that's causing you harm or causing you trouble, the emergency protocol in the taxi. They had a green light that you could put on above your vacant sign, and if a taxi had that green light on, they were in distress. It was just a button on your console in your cab, so other cabs could come and assist you. But there was also a radio call sign that you could make to the base, and the operator would track your car and dispatch other taxis to come and meet you and intercept. And I used that button twice in my 3 years. One time when a guy was getting pretty abusive in the taxi, and we needed other taxis to come and rescue me, and he got agitated when other taxis started arriving, and it was touch and go, but he didn't hit me. And we got that dealt with. And another time, a female was really annoying me in the taxi, and I had struggles with anger, and it wasn't me that was in danger. She was in danger of me hitting her, and that's not a nice confession, but she really riled me up the wrong way. And I rang the emergency number and had other taxis come, and one of the other taxis took her as a passenger and took her home. So I had emergencies a couple of times in my 3 years of driving, and they taught that emergency protocol in the taxi driving course before I got my license. So I started at this taxi base with 100 taxis. So chapter 3, my first shifts, they had 6 radio channels which were split up between different areas in the city of Brisbane. The city of Brisbane was set up into 6 geographical places, and the radio call would go, "Can I have a taxi for the West End rank?" And that was calling for any taxi on the suburb of West End on the taxi rank in West End. So the taxi caller would say, "Can I have a West End rank?" And if there was a taxi on the West End rank, it'd say cab 32 on the West End rank, and said, "Can you pick up a fare at 17 Jones Street, West End, and the name of Peters?" Yes, taxi 32, confirm, out. And it's going 30 years back, so I'm trying to remember what would happen. But if there wasn't a taxi on the West End rank, he'd call a taxi for the West End block, and that was within the suburb of West End. So he'd go West End rank. If no one responded, he'd say West End block. And then any car in the suburb of West End would call cab 32 at Jones and Lincoln Street, West End, and or cab 32 at 26 Long Street, West End. And all the taxis would come in that were in the block, and the person calling the job would work out which is the closest taxi based on where they said they were. And then he'd get the job, and they'd dispatch the job to that person. And then if there wasn't anyone in the West End block, then he'd say vacant West End. And then people from surrounding suburbs could bid on the job, and it'd be up to the person calling the job to work out which taxi is closer. So the people dispatching the work at West End or on the radio had to not only be a taxi driver, but they had to have a really accurate knowledge of streets and suburbs to be able to measure which taxi's closer within a suburb. With 3 taxis coming in bidding for a job, they had to really be real experts. I really admired them, I really respected them, and had a good reputation with them towards the end of my taxi driving career. So the radio split up into 6 different geographical areas, and then suburbs like West End, Hill End, Highgate Hill, Yeronga, Chardons Hill. There was a whole lot of suburbs, like 20 or more suburbs that were included on one radio number. And there were 6 radio numbers, there were 6 channels. And so there may be up to 20 or 30 suburbs included on one channel, and everyone within that geographical area would be on that channel on the radio and would be listening until it comes up West End rank. And if they were on West End, they'd come in. Now, if you're out of your car having a smoke or out of your car for some reason, and they call West End rank, and the first car didn't come in because you're out of your car, when he called West End block, the second yellow cab on West End could notice that you missed the call, and he'd come in second car West End rank, and he'd get the job. So it was important to always be alert, but it was important to be on the right channel, because if you weren't on the right channel, you wouldn't hear any jobs for your suburb. Now, and on certain times of night, they'd only run 4 channels instead of 6 channels. And as it came into daylight, they'd start running the 6 channels again. And I found that out on my first shift that I went on. I went early in the morning, and they changed the channel for where I was early in the morning. So I was sitting on a rank for an hour without getting a job because I was listening to the wrong channel. And I finally went to the taxi behind me and asked me, "What channel are you on?" And he said, "Oh, at this time in the morning, it's channel 2. And I went back and switched my channel to channel 2 and got a job within 5 minutes. But all the taxis behind me had been saying second car Highgate Hill rank, and getting the job and driving off. I wondered why taxis behind me were driving off and I wasn't getting a job, because I wasn't even hearing the job call because it was on a different radio channel. So my first shift, I was learning, and the good thing about when it was on radio and not dispatched with computers was that if I knew the streets, I could get to the streets fast. It's not a good thing. I should say the bad thing about the radio was that everyone on the radio could hear the pickup address. And if you had a customer in your car and you were dropping them off on a street, and the same street was where someone was meant to be picking them up, you could drop off your customer and pick up the other customer off some other taxi before that taxi got there from the West End rank. So there was a lot of stealing of fares. There was a lot of stealing of customers when it was on radio. So that's why it's important for you to know where the streets were, because you had to get there fast or else someone would steal your job. And that's why when I started, I was very comfortable in the area and the 5 or 6 suburbs that I used to deliver pizzas to, because if you had to look up a street directory, you've pretty much lost your job. Another taxi's picked up your job, and all they've got to do is cruise down the road and have a person put their hand out and stop and put them in the car. Even if you saw the person getting in the taxi, you can't pull up to a taxi and accuse him of stealing your fare. So it was dog eat dog world. So my first shift was filled with learning experience, like the time I spent an hour at Highgate Hill on the wrong channel. But you also had to learn how people get up in the morning and what they do, and what suburbs order more taxis and what suburbs order few taxis. And there was a whole lot to work out. West End rank got a whole lot more jobs than Highgate Hill rank because it covered more area. But a Highgate Hill job going into the city was a better fare. So you had to judge between being the third car on West End or the first car on Highgate Hill. And you had to bet and hedge your bets on who was ordering a cab and how frequent one rank moves and the other rank moves. So there's a real learning curve to the taxi driving. They told us in our training course, don't try and tell people the way that you're going to go. Ask them which way they want to go and go the way they want. And the person training said that everyone has got a favourite way of going from one suburb to the next or getting to a destination. And most often their way is their favourite way, but it's not the shortest direct route. As a taxi driver, it was the law to take them on the shortest direct route from one place to another. So I was obligated as a taxi driver to take someone on the shortest direct route to their destination, but I wasn't obligated to do that if they were telling me the route. So the advice that I heard in the training course was let your customers decide the way that they want to go. So just ask your customer which way they want to go and let them direct you. And I did that, and it made driving a taxi very easy for me because most people knew where they were going and knew how to get there. So I ventured out on those 6 suburbs. I used to get a job from one of those 6 suburbs to another suburb, then I'd drive back to one of those 6 suburbs again. I'd keep on driving back until I learned the whole area of a channel, and then I wouldn't drive back. Then I'd venture out to other suburbs I learned. I had to know how to get from the suburbs I was servicing to the airport, and I had to know how to get from the suburbs I was servicing to the city, and I had to know basically how to get my taxi from one place that I was servicing to any other place in Brisbane. I had to know the major roads in Brisbane, and I had to know which major roads to take to get to other suburbs in Brisbane. So I had to know that basic information. But as I said, when it was on the radio, when jobs were dispatched on the radio, you had to be really quick to pick up your passengers. And so it made getting a job outside of the known areas harder. It was essentially, if you had to look up a street directory for a street, a lot of times you'd lose a job. And the person reporting the job doesn't ring base saying, I picked up such and such passenger. You just get there, honk your horn, and they don't turn up. Then you've got to go and wait on the rank again and get another job. And you might come back to the rank and there might be 2 cars in front of you. So you've just wasted not only the 20 minutes that you waited for the job, plus the 10 minutes that it took for you to find your job wasn't there and come back to the rank, and then wait another half an hour for the other 2 cabs to get a job before you get a job. So it took a while for me to learn how to cover the whole of Brisbane, and know the streets and know how to get there. So I started my day shifts at the base, and the problem with the base with 100 taxis is they had hopeless mechanics and hopeless cars. The cars were in the worst condition, and they just had too many cars to be serviced, and so they only serviced cars when there was something wrong with them. And so I had to get enough experience for a private owner to take me on, but it was hard at the base to work because the standard of the cars was no good. As you learn to drive, you'd notice smarter cars and smarter looking taxis, and you'd find out owners who had smarter looking cars. And there was always the paper every week where you could pick up a paper, and it would say taxi drivers needed, and you could ring up the number of the suburb because it'd say what suburb they're in. And if it was a close suburb, you could ring up the number and get a job for them. So one of my, chapter 5 is driving for Mike. I applied for a job doing the day shift with a person called Mike, and I've changed names to protect people's identities. And he was in the western suburbs of Brisbane, and he had a night driver that used to pick me up from my house at 2 a.m. When he was finishing, and take me out to drop him off out in the western suburbs. And I'd drive the taxi back, and I'd either start there at 2:30 in the morning, or I'd sleep into 5 o'clock, and then I'd have my taxi at home. And the night driver used to pick me up and drop me off. And so that was really good. And that worked for me, and made it possible for me to work with that owner. He had 2 taxis. When I drove 30 years ago, a license plate for a taxi was $250,000. So this owner had $500,000 invested in 2 taxis, and he had good condition taxis, had a good mechanic, and he had 2 good taxis. And I really enjoyed working for him. One of his taxis was called 149, and I don't know the number of the other taxi, 201, I think it was, and I drove 201, and he was a real family man and introduced me to his family. And he was a driver himself. He drove the day shift with me in the other taxi, and he had 2 night drivers. So while we were out each day in the day shift, I could hear him on different channels bidding for jobs. And I remember when he let me go because of the night driver changed, and I was having trouble getting to his place by early in the morning on public transport. So he let me go. When he let me go, I used to outbid him on jobs on the radio. I'd lie about my position on the road when they were doing the calls. When they did the vacant call, I'd put myself forward in a position that I knew would win the job, but I wasn't there. I'd say I was there, but I wasn't there. And that was called throwing your location. And I used to do that when he was competing with jobs for me. And he understood that I didn't forgive him for letting me go from that. He commented once to one of the radio operators that he's going to leave this channel because his former driver won't let him get any jobs in the area. And he was real friends with that radio dispatch guy, and it was just letting me know that he knows what I'm up to, but he's going to bow out and not compete. But he was a really good owner. Part of driving a taxi is having a taxi maintained and having it in a good condition with good tyres and good servicing and good mechanics. And this guy had 2 taxis and used to keep them maintained and serviced, and they were in really good condition. I'm not sure about you, but I've been in taxis that were a real mess before. I've been in taxis that smelled. I've been in taxis that weren't running well. And when I drove for the base, all the taxis didn't seem to run well. So as you respected yourself as a taxi driver and you had some self-esteem, you'd find yourself looking for owners that looked after their taxis. And this owner had a good mechanic that serviced his taxis, and I wouldn't even have to ring the owner. I'd just turn up to the mechanic, and the mechanic would drop everything he's doing and come over to the taxi and fix it. And so they might tell me to go away for an hour, or I'd wait and I'd fix the taxi. So it really made a difference working for a good taxi owner. I remember this taxi owner lived like a 20-minute drive from the airport, and I often did my last job in the afternoon and dropped off someone at the airport and shot away from the airport, and 20 minutes had my taxi back ready for the night shift driver. It was really handy to the airport on a freeway. So that was really good. So there's pressures to driving a taxi. A good owner would give you 50% of your takings. Different taxi companies run differently. The taxi owners that I work for paid me 50% of my takings. So as long as you're honest with the taxi owners, you'd owe them 50% of what was run on the meter minus the gas. Um, so you'd give them 50%. You'd split the earnings in half, 50%, and then take the gas out of their 50%. So they'd end up with about 42% of the takings, and you'd end up with 50%. And so you invested your time into driving someone else's taxi, and because they own the $250,000 license plate, they get 42% of the money, and they can be sleeping in bed. So taxis back 30 years ago was a great investment before Uber. So as a taxi driver, you can really improve your lot in life by choosing greater standard taxis and greater standard taxi owners. So that was one of them. I remember one time I was running late, and I was just before I was left. It could have been the reason why he let me go. I started late in the morning and was in a rush, and it was raining, and I came down the hill, and I put my feet on the brakes to stop because there was another car coming down the road. And as I came to the intersection, the brakes jammed, and I slid through the intersection and hit the other car and T-boned the other car. And that was a great big accident, and it cost the owner time off the road and smash repairs, and I felt really guilty for that. So that could have been the reason he let me go. He just didn't say that was the reason. But I really liked that owner, and we did patch things up later on. I didn't keep him in unforgiveness all the time. Yeah, so that's one of my few accidents I had with that owner. I got another owner. We're gonna, chapter 6 is driving for James. We're gonna get to the stories, some of the stories soon enough, but this is just some of the guts of driving a taxi. The day shift in Brisbane, Australia started at 4 a.m. and finished at 4 p.m. So it was basically 3 hours before people woke up that you had the taxi. So you had to find something to do for those 3 hours, and people didn't really start moving to the airport till 6 o'clock, and they didn't start going to work till 7 o'clock. So there's a couple of slow hours. So a lot of taxis didn't start till 6:30 or 7 o'clock. But if you want to be first on the rank, that the airport suburbs, the richer suburbs that booked taxis for the airport, if you want to be first on the rank, which gives you the first opportunity to do a job, most people go to the airport at 5 or 6 o'clock. You had to be on that rank at 4 o'clock if you wanted the 5 o'clock booking. You had to be there waiting for half an hour before the 5 o'clock booking came. And but no one tells you where the suburbs are that have the work that goes to the airport. The airport are big jobs. No one tells you, well, on the West End rank, about 2 out of 20 jobs go to the airport every morning. On the Highgate Hill rank, about 1 in 10 jobs go to the airport in the morning. And on the Kenmore rank, about 2 out of 4 jobs go to the airport at that time in the morning. You had to find that information out yourself through trial and error. And so taxi drivers are fun and exciting people to talk to, but they don't share information, insider information, with each other too readily, because they're all in competition. They're all trying to earn their 50%. And so I learned to get my cab at 4 o'clock and go to this rank at Kenmore, which was a rich suburb, and I'd drive my car out there at 4 o'clock and park first on the rank and put my seatbelt on and go to sleep and rest my head on the seatbelt. And I'd go to sleep with my radio in my hand, and I'd sleep to 5 o'clock or 5:15 or 5:30 when the first job would come, and I'd wake up and there'd be a job to the airport. Most often at that time, a job to the airport. But that took driving 30 kilometres from where I picked up the taxi. And there's another thing that you consider in taxi driving is the taxi owners look at the amount of miles that you drive in a day and how many dollars you earn. And if you're driving too many miles for the dollars earned, you can lose your job. So you've got to watch how many blank runs you have, and chewing up 30 kilometres or 20 miles without anyone in your taxi is an expensive thing to do for your credibility. But I had to travel to that place because that's where a lot of the airport jobs came from. So I'd get in a taxi at 4 a.m, travel out to Kenmore and sleep on the rank and get the first job. Now, people only really went to the airport on Monday and Tuesday, and not as many went there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because they're traveling away for the week. So airport jobs didn't go off every morning. And you can imagine that the more statistics that you know, the more you understand how many people are leaving from which areas and how often and how frequently they're leaving different areas. The more you know that information, the higher your earnings will be. So you could find a vacant taxi rank like Hill End, which was near West End, and you might find that during the day it might have 2 jobs in an hour, but West End would have 20 jobs in an hour. So is it worth your while being the first cab on the Hill End rank and have to wait for half an hour for a job, or it's best being the 4th cab on West End and only waiting 15 minutes for your job. So there was always statistics in my mind, and even to this day, 30 years later, I can tell you how many taxis were ordered per hour in many suburbs in Brisbane. I don't know how it is with Uber, but I still know the figures that it used to be 30 years ago. So I had a mathematical mind. Driving for James was wonderful. He was a great driver. He was a day shift driver. So he drove the cab and day shift. And when I worked for him, I worked for night shift. And when you work on night shift, the first few hours of your driving is taking people home from work. And then around 6 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, there's people leaving from their homes to go into restaurants and stuff. And from 8, 9 o'clock at night, they start leaving from the city again to go home from restaurants. And then later in the evening, you're just taking drunks home. We just call them drunks, people who've been drinking all night and are catching taxis home. And because of safe driving and not driving under the influence, that's where we want people to be. We don't want them driving their cars home when they're drunk. We want them catching taxis, and that's a safe option. So taxis save a lot of car accidents. I remember one time I picked up this guy who stumbled against the window of the cab, which means he was really drunk. He couldn't open the door. We opened the door and got him in a taxi, and I took him to a football club, and he was getting out to go and get in his car and start his car and drive it home. And I said, I'll ring the police. I'll report you. You won't even get out of the car lot. If you do that, you're going to come home with me. And he got angry at me, and I said, there's no choice. I'm going to ring the police now. I was going to ring the emergency number on the taxi. And so he got in a cab, and I took him home. Well, he was a drunk driver, and he was catching a taxi back to his car. And then he was going to drive his car home, and he was smashed. He was so drunk. So we owe it to night drivers who drive from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. For many of the drunks getting home at night. And if you've been honest, if you've lived in the world and got drunk before, you've probably caught a taxi home being drunk. The one thing about taking drunks home is drunks either sleep, they're violent, or they're argumentative, or they talk a lot. So you've got to have a sort of lack of self-esteem to drive drunks home. Some of the angry ones are just angry, and you've got to let them be angry and just take it. If you stand up for yourself, you'll be in a fight. So it got to a stage driving night shift that I had enough of it. But I learned of, when I was driving for James, I learned he used to talk about this driver that he had that was before me. And this driver was the best driver this owner had ever had. And it's very interesting because I went on to another taxi driving base after James, and I was driving the night shift there too. And I met that driver that this owner was talking about. He was driving for the same base of mine, and this base of mine only had 6 cars. And I'd picked out their cars because I met their drivers, and I knew they had great cars and they had mobile phones in them and cell phones in them. And I thought it was a great standard of cabs, so I chased down the owners and got a job working for them. Then I found out this name of this guy who used to drive for James, and found he was driving there. So we'd both driven for James and both left James and had driven for this owner, which made that owner the best driver. And this other driver that James talked about, he was the best taxi driver I'd ever met in my life. He had the highest earnings. It was really hard to match his earnings. I was a very good driver. I was, like you can tell, I was very statistical in my mind, and I knew Brisbane very well by then and could operate in the outskirts of Brisbane as well as in the inner city really, really well. And this other driver consistently got more money than me, consistently earned more money than me. Many night drivers on slower nights don't stay on to 4 o'clock. They come in at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning because if you're a night driver, if you're a day driver, often a cab has been waiting and it's cooled down by the time you start your shift, because the night driver has brought the cab in. But on Friday and Saturday nights, the night drivers drive to 4 a.m. in the morning because it's busy until then. So James was a really good owner who's really good to me. I remember while I was driving for James, I got a letter in the mail. James got a letter in the mail asking him what my earnings were as a taxi owner. I think this is the reason I left driving for James. He said my former wife knew that I worked for James as a taxi driver and was sending the people that require you to pay child support. She was sending that organisation after me to garnish my wages for child support. And James said to me, I can say that you don't work for me anymore, but that'll have to be the case. You'll have to leave. And I'll just say he used to work for me, but he doesn't work for me anymore. And I don't know who he's working for now. And he may have been the one that gave me the tip where his former driver had gone. But I remember he stood up for me in that situation, and I wasn't a good father. I figured if I wasn't seeing my son, neither should I be paying child support, and so I didn't pay it, and I regret that now. But when you're young, you don't do these things. So I drove for years, for quite a while for James, and we parted ways. I also was driving early in the morning and got a job one morning for an airport job, and I was coming around a corner and I didn't merge into the traffic right, and I hit another car and had an accident in James's car too. And he he was good about it, but I could tell it hurt him financially. And and that was my second accident. I only had 2 accidents in 3 years, and they're both pretty scary. But when you're driving 60 hours a week, these things can be expected. So, okay, so I moved to a suburb called Spring Hill in Brisbane, and while I was living in Spring Hill, I had an addiction to prostitutes. Like I said in the introduction, I used to drive on a Friday night and earn the amount needed to see a prostitute for half an hour, and then knock off work around 8 o'clock and go and see a prostitute for half an hour, then spend the rest of the night earning the money to earn $50 for the night rather than 170, which I would have earned without seeing her. And around about that time, I was living just north of the city, just on the city outskirts, CBD outskirts of Brisbane. And I rang this magazine that was advertising escorts. And I came across this escort's name was Chloe. And I found out she worked in Spring Hill, and she just worked around the corner from my house. And so I went and booked her. And one thing that most prostitutes don't do is they don't passionately kiss, and they don't French kiss. And very few prostitutes actually French kiss, and Chloe did. So that was really attractive to me. And I noticed when I went into Chloe's working apartment that she had these ceramic paintings, ceramic molds that were painted, and they were of Indian, like a wolf and Indian, American Indian carvings of faces and stuff. And they were spiritual. They had a spiritual presence to them. And I was really attracted to that. And I got speaking to her, and she said that she prayed over them and got that spiritual presence to be part of it. We know as Christians, we know that's a demonic presence that was on them, but you could feel it on them. And she did a really good job painting them. And she did one for me, actually. I asked her if she'd do one for me, and she said she doesn't do them for clients. And I said, come on. And but what I noticed with Chloe, not only did she kiss, but she wasn't in a rush to have me leave. Normally, an escort, a prostitute will see you for half an hour, and the sex will be over in 5 minutes or 7 minutes. And they'll normally rush you into a shower and have you out the door in 20 minutes. Well, Chloe didn't rush me into a shower, and around about the half an hour mark, she was still talking in bed, and I didn't leave until the 45-minute mark. And that really made an impression on me, that I wasn't being rushed. So I had an addiction, and I've talked about my addiction before. I had an addiction where I saw a new prostitute every time I seen a prostitute, and I'd only once seen a prostitute, twice, and she was another one that kissed. And I was currently seeing that prostitute and regularly going to her when I met Chloe one weekend. And so I started to seek Chloe on a regular basis. And I lived at Spring Hill, and round about that time, a strip club opened in Spring Hill, and the owner let taxi drivers know that if you brought uh, clients to his strip joint, you could come into the strip joint, have a free admittance to the strip joint, and drink sodas and have brewed coffee for free. So you could stay there for hours, you could get in for free, you could stay there for hours and drink soda and have brewed coffee there for free. And so I started on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I used to work Tuesday night to Saturday night. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I used to finish work at 12 o'clock, and I'd go to this player's strip joint, and I'd stay there to 4 in the morning when they closed. And the reason I knocked off at 12 o'clock is that's when all the work stopped, because most people are in bed by 12 o'clock at night if they're working during the week. So Monday to Thursday, I stayed working to 12 o'clock until my earnings dropped below $20 an hour. So for me to be getting $10 an hour, getting my 50%, if I wouldn't work for less than $10 an hour. And that was 30 years ago, so that was all right money. I hear some people still only get $10 an hour in the United States. So on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights, I used to be in players from 12 to 4, and I'd drink coffee or have beers or sodas. And I initially, in this strip joint, they did lap dances, which is a girl takes you to a private part of the club and strips and rubs herself all over your body. And I initially did that, but then I realized pretty quick that you'll be treated as a client like that and you won't be respected by the girls, so I didn't. So I totally stopped that, and I got to know all the girls, and I had one favorite girl who used to talk to me, and when I was in there in a taxi uniform, in the yellow cab's uniform, I'd find a lot of the customers in the strip club would come up to me and ask me who was the best girl in the club, and I'd say, well, that depends. It depends if you ask me who the best blonde is, or the best brunette, or who I consider as the best girl. And I'd say, well, the best blonde. So the best blonde, not the highest earning blonde, but the best blonde in this place is that one over there. And they'd go and book her. And if they said the best brunette, I'd say not the highest earning brunette, but the best brunette best personality, best looking, best personality brunette is that one over there. But I set up the way I said it to have them choose um, the best stripper. When I said that depends what you want, the best blonde, the best brunette, or the best stripper. And so most of them would choose the best stripper. And I said, well, she's not the highest earner in the place, but she's the nicest one to me. And if you want a girl who you can sit down and talk to and have a good conversation with, and isn't just here to earn your money, well, this is the one over here. Her name's such and such. And I can introduce you if you like. And that girl I used to recommend used to buy me free drinks because she was earning hundreds of dollars a week from my recommendations. And I was doing nothing. I was just sitting there in my taxi uniform, and people would approach me and ask me. Because before Google, people used to ask taxi drivers heaps of questions. Where's the best restaurant? What's the weather doing? What's the trade? What do you think of Trump? What do you think of Trump saying this? So taxi drivers were used as a great source of information. And back then, a taxi driver sitting in a strip club was a great source of information. They just came to the taxi driver. So I used to drink there for free, and she'd pick up the tab on the drinks because she was earning hundreds of dollars through me each night. I think the girls were $50 for a lap dance, for like a 15-minute dance. And I think the girls were $200 an hour for their time. So if someone wanted to book a girl for an hour, they'd go and have a lap dance and sit down and talk, and it cost them $200. I found that I made friends with the girls in there, and because I wasn't booking lap dances, I did. And later on, I started driving for a taxi owner who worked with the club. And when I was working with him, we were taking the girls home for free. For a fare, they paid us to take them home, but we'd put 4 strippers in a cab and take them all home one by one on one big trip. And I used to get paid for that. But I knew the girls in the personal life, and as a person who was addicted to the sex industry, it was really good to have strippers who were your friends. And I knew they were friends because when I was down in the city on days off, I would meet them and we'd go out for a coffee. And if I met up with them, if I bumped into them, you could be saying, what are you doing now? So I'm going for a coffee. Do you want to come? And I'd come. And so it wasn't this professional relationship that you don't see them out of work. They were real friends. And I remember one time that I was suicidal. I got up at 11 o'clock in the morning because I'd driven a Saturday night shift. It was Sunday, and I got up at 11 o'clock and I walked down to the city, and I decided to take my own life that day. And I went and watched a movie at 11:45 and came out of the movie at 2 o'clock and went to Pizza Hut, all you can eat. And I ate my fill of pizza and then read a newspaper and then ate my fill of pizza again. then went and watched another movie at 4 o'clock and came out at 6:30, and went and watched a busker. And then I was passing up to go to the strip joint at 7 o'clock, and there was a band playing, and they played the song Hold On by ELO, and it brought tears to my eyes. And after the band stopped playing, a man came up to me and said, "I can see the song had you emotional. Can I pray for you?" And I let go a lot of expletives at him and said, God's had enough time to save me. I've had enough now. And the guy said to me, "What if I was to tell you, if I said, so you can F off, I'm going." And he said, "Before you go, can I just say something?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What if I was to tell you drive taxis and you woke up at 11 o'clock tonight and this morning, and you came down to the city and you watched this movie," and he named the movie. "Then you went to Pizza Hut, all you can eat, and you ate pizza, and then you came down and you watched this movie. What if I said you came out of the movies and went to the phone box over there and rang your former wife and told her if you ever die, that that you died of an illness, and tell your son you died of an illness? And what if I was going to say that you're just about to go to a club up there and have a few drinks, and then you're going to catch a taxi to the Gateway Bridge and jump off it and kill yourself? If I told you all of that, would you think that God is talking to me?" And that's by far the best prophecy I've ever heard in my life. It saved my life. And I said, "Yes, I believe God's telling me that." I was just shocked. And he said, "Well, can I pray for you? And when I pray for you, God's going to give you a message. And I want you to listen to the message. But in order to get the message, I'm going to have to pray. And when God gives a message, I'll say, 'Thus saith the Lord,' and then God will speak to you." And I said, "Okay." And he did. He prayed and he said, "Thus saith the Lord, I called you as a young boy and promised you that you'd be used in ministry, and I'm going to use you in ministry. I've just got a few rough edges to take off your life. And when I've removed you, the rough edges, I'm going to raise you up in ministry, and I'm going to powerfully use you." And he said a few more things, and he saved my life. Because I was on the way to that strip joint to say goodbye to my friends. And then I was going to jump off that bridge. I was on the way to kill myself. And that's often what a person does before they kill themselves. They say goodbye to a few loved ones. I was on my way to do it, and he saved my life with a prophecy. So Players was an integral part of my life, and Players was the name of the strip joint. And strippers were friends. We had many men came into Players, and they had a lap dance, but there was no way you could get sex in the place. Men were sexually frustrated and used to come up to me and ask me where they could get an escort and a prostitute. And there were prostitutes that stood outside of Players and were streetwalkers. And I'd send most men out to the streetwalkers. But late at night on a Thursday night, or sometimes on a Friday and Saturday night, I used to park my taxi up there and men would get in a taxi and ask where could they see a prostitute, and I'd ring Chloe and say, if the person was okay and they weren't a jerk, I'd ring Chloe and say, "Are you free?" And she said, "Yeah, I've got a client here. He wants to talk to you." And I'd put the person on the phone, and I'd she'd say how much it was and stuff, and he'd get off the phone, and I'd drive him 500, 100 meters up the road to her place, and then she'd ring me when he's finished, and I'd take him home. And so Chloe, I used to see Chloe, and I'd see her every week on Friday night. And then I reached a stage where I fell in love with her, and I told her I couldn't use her as a prostitute anymore, and I went back to the former prostitute I used to see. And Chloe was upset with me and said, "Why don't you, if you love me, why don't you make love to me? Why do you have to leave?" And I didn't know it at the time, but Chloe had feelings for me. And um, later on, uh, after that, after I stopped seeing her, I used to keep on bringing her clients, and from time to time would have a coffee up in her apartment while I was working, while she was working. But 6 months later, I was driving early on the Saturday or Sunday morning, and I had the urge to see a prostitute, and I rang Chloe up and said, "Are you still working?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm coming to book you." And she said, "You're getting me all excited." And I said, "Well, I'm going to come." And I met her, and I pressed her intercom, and she said, "Are you really coming upstairs?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "And you're going to book me?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "You're getting me all excited." And I pressed the intercom and got let into her apartment. She opened the door and we kissed, and it was like in the movies how they kiss and they throw their clothes off all the way to the bedroom. Well, it was like that, like it played in the movies, and we made love for the first time. And soon after, we were going out with each other, and soon after that, we were engaged. But Chloe broke off the engagement when Jesus told her that I was going to marry someone in the future, and she was going to be a better bride for me. And so she can't marry me. And she was upset, but she told me, and she broke it off. And I haven't met that bride yet. Maybe Jesus is my bride. But we broke up. But so as a taxi driver, you get asked where an escort is, what a best stripper is, where a good restaurant is, what's your advice on this? And these were days before Google, where you can type into Google any question and get your answers. Back then, there wasn't Google. You had a library and library index cards, and you could look up subjects, but you'd have to read books. Back then, they used to ask taxi drivers. So living in Spring Hill was where I met Chloe, and living in Spring Hill was where I frequented Players, and Players used to be 100 meters from my house. And so if I got inebriated, if I got drunk, and I rarely did, but if I did, I'd only be walking home. So I didn't have a taxi to drive home. I used to walk home. So, yeah. Okay, so in video 2, this is the finish of part 1. In video 2, we're going to talk about some of the exploits, some of the stories of driving a taxi. I hope this has been informative so far. Please like this video. Please share this video. Please comment on this video. And forgive me for the R-rated content.